If you're joining us, if you could describe your leadership team in one word, what would you say? And you just have to drop it in the chat. You can't come off of mute and tell me, but I really want to know.
I'm like dying to see it, but I can't wait.
I know. I'm like, everybody, if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. It's always, I think, jarring too when I'm over. I'm like, is this your first HR therapy? And people are like, oh my God, what's happening here? I've never been to this event before. I don't know what this is like. So if you're joining us in the chat, drop if you could describe your leadership team in one word, what would it be? I'm waiting.
There we go. They're starting to come in.
Here, it's stressed. The two top people who said that.
Yep.
By the way, if it says to everyone, it comes to all of us. If it says to the hosts and panelists, that's only to the hosts and panelists.
I'm seeing quite a range here. I got visionary in there, but I also see a little bit of dysfunctional.
Yeah.
A little bit of struggling. You hate to see stressed because that trickles down, of course, but understandable.
Yeah. Someone
supportive.
I love this.
Ooh, in a bubble. Your audience is the best, Hiba. So descriptive. I love this. Well balanced.
Tell like it is. We're gonna tell it like it is. I'm loving everyone saying chaos is making me laugh because I have seen
a lot of chaos.
A lot of chaos on leadership teams these days.
Shout out for kind.
Love it. If you are dropping notes in the chat, just a heads up, there's a 2 and it says everyone. That's everyone here. If there's a 2 and you're only writing it to hosts and panelists, only me and Matt are seeing it. So just a heads up if you want to participate in the chat.
Might have a new favorite. I saw yikes. Just yikes.
I actually love the person who said absolutely chaotic. Like they wanted to be very clear. It is chaotic.
Let me remove all doubt.
Love it. Well-meaning. Awesome. Okay. Okay. Who do we think the mix of positive to like negative descriptors are right now?
Well, I would hate to say 50-50, but I think it's probably 60-40. I think 60 is the stress, the frustrated, the burned out, the inexperienced. Man.
Slowly reactive is a fascinating thing. Like you think of reactive as usually you're doing that quickly. And this person's slowly reactive, but I feel that. Hey,
we probably should put that fire out at some point.
Yeah. Eventually this will be an issue. I love when people are like, it's a problem for future me. I'm like, that's my worst nightmare. So like future me is not going to be happy with past me. I'm going to have to figure it out now. Okay, great. Well, more people are trickling in. We're so happy to have you all here. I think more will be joining us. Let's get into our conversation because I swear I could spend all day long on this exact slide. Feel free to still drop your answers in the chat. But we'll get into HR therapy. Welcome. If you've never been here before, you are really in for a treat. HR therapy is the monthly virtual event that I do for the I Hate It Here audience and anyone else who wants to join. So everyone is welcome here. And today we are talking about authentic leadership and the role of self-awareness, a topic I am so genuinely excited to dive into that like I can't even control my excitement because there's like so much I want to say about leadership and self-awareness and the fact that a lot of people lack it. And I just got to give a big shout out to my sponsor, the Predictive Index. Without them, I wouldn't get to have these amazing conversations. And I also love what they're doing, work around so many different areas that I love and adore and talk about quite frequently. So big thank you to them because I get to do all the fun stuff because of them. And here's what we're going to do today. I love a good agenda. You're going to meet me and Matt. If you haven't met us before, you're in for a treat. We're going to do Dear Hiba and Friends, which if you've ever read any advice column, like Dear Anne, which is what I read growing up, that's basically what this is. We take questions and we put them into this segment, and then we also take live questions. So if you have questions, there is a Q&A function of Zoom. You can go ahead and drop questions in there, and we will make sure to collect them and actually address them at the end of this event. And then we'll talk about what's next at the very end. So before we get to all the good stuff, I have to do a quick reminder. This is being recorded. Nothing about your names, identification, none of that's being recorded. Whatever you put in the chat, don't worry about it. It will not be attributed to you. On the note of the chat, it is distracting. If you do not want to talk to people, if you do not want to make friends, if you do not want to engage, just minimize it and just know that it's going to be going off. It is very distracting. Just want to warn you all. And finally, in the last 20 minutes, we're going to take live questions from you all. So if you have a burning question that you want to make sure gets answered, you can submit it and we will try to get to it. Whoever just said feral, I'm laughing so hard that you chose that descriptor of your leadership team. Okay. Who are we and what are we doing here? Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sir, happy to. My name is Matt Poepsel. I work for the Predictive Index, and I'm also a graduate professor of HR and leadership at Boston College.
When you told me you were teaching a class, I was like, excuse me, how do you have time for this? And also, I want to take this class. I'm like trying to angle to get this to take this class. What is your class on, Matt?
It's on the future of work and how HR leaders can step up and really guide us to the places that we need to go.
Love it. Okay. And I am Hiba Yusuf. If all of you have not met me before, I'm just a wild card. I am the CPO at Workweek, which is a creator-led media company. I'm also the founder and creator behind a brand called I Hate It Here. It's a newsletter that reaches over 155,000 people a week. I also have HR Therapy. It's my virtual event series and a community of HR leaders that recently surpassed 4,000 members called Safe Space. And if you're interested in applying, we'll drop a link and you can join. It's a really good time. My favorite feature in Safe Space, just to throw this out there, is the library because I'm a dork, but there's a bunch of really good templates in there for HR people. And I really wanted to build a space where HR people felt safe talking to one another because we don't really get to talk to many people in our organization with full transparency. So Safe Space is a place where you can do that. So please join us if you want to. Okay, without further ado, let's get into it, Matt. Dear Hilda, and here we go. Here we go. Okay, here's our first question. What does authentic leadership actually mean in today's workplace?
It's such a term that we hear all the time, right? But what does it actually mean? I love that we're pulling this apart. And for me, when you look at that word authentic, it's all kind of evokes genuine, right? For me, we kind of outlined it in the title as well. It's all about self-awareness. It has to begin there because without awareness, nothing else can flow from that. And Tasha Eurich is a researcher, and she had done some research that found that 95% of us believe that we're self-aware, when in reality, only 5 to 10, 15 at the best percent of us actually are. No, that's not you and me, Heather. Of course, we're tremendously self-aware. I'm sure she's talking about other people, but it does bring up for me one of the things that I teach at the leadership side around self-awareness. By the end of the class, definitely the students are thinking, I came in thinking I was self-aware, but now I'm not so sure. And it's because, what we think of for ourselves, we have to start to apply. Is that true in every context? Is it true in the depths of those places that we don't often like to go under deep reflection? And so I think self-awareness is a big part of it. But also what comes with that is self-acceptance. I think there's parts of who we are. I know thousands and thousands of leaders. I don't know any perfect leaders. Never met one, never will. And so I think being able to not just make peace with some of your perceived flaws, but also to use them to really draw other people closer to you, to really act out of that authentic leadership. It doesn't mean perfect leadership. It just means just being unapologetic about certain things that you just have to admit, like, hey, I'm not the most detail-oriented person. You might not believe that it's completely true. And I need a lot of help. And it took me a long time in my career to be courageous enough to kind of admit that and surround myself with people who could complete me in a Jerry Maguire kind of way. And so things got a lot better after that.
I love that story because it also took me a while to get there too. And now I'm like notoriously known for saying in meetings, if you do not give me a deadline, I will not do this. Like I need a deadline. I need to know what's next. And I think I get the feedback a lot that I'm very authentic. And I think, first of all, that's like wonderful feedback to get, but it also took me a really long time to get there and understanding who I wanted to be as a leader. And I think to me, it just seeing people, connect the dots and kind of light up when you show up as yourself, they feel like more comfortable to show up as themselves. And so when I can,
100%.
and I nobody, like you said, there's no perfect leader. Nobody has all the right answers. And I do think in today's day and age, with the evolution of TikTok and all these media apps where people can show up authentically as themselves, people are coming to work and they're looking at their leaders and they're distinguishing very quickly who's being authentic and who isn't.
Oh yeah, trained to make those judgment calls very quickly, and I'm so pleased that you found that confidence in your voice and being authentic because it's such a gift for your community. I didn't list among my many accolades being the president of the Hibba fan club, which is should be on my LinkedIn profile. I need to add that. But I think that for me, what comes along is that it took me a long time, and the aging process actually helped me become more authentic because I became exhausted from trying to put up this facade of all the things I wasn't, and eventually that authenticity as I let it go, everything got so much easier and the results I produced was so much more profound. But most importantly, the connections that people had to me became that much more robust and deep. So I think that I really kind of outsmarted myself for too long there. And instead, that authentic leadership means just, letting that natural energy fly and just accepting sort of the results that you get.
Yeah. And I think the second part of this question that I included very specifically is like today's constantly evolving workplaces. It feels like things are changing so rapidly, even with the introduction of AI, but it just feels like every single day there's something new. And I do think when you're able to show up as yourself and say, I don't have all the answers. Like I've never built an AI strategy before, but I'm going to do it. And here's what we're going to learn. I think that has also been really key in like building trust with employees when I feel like trust as it is at an all-time low, honestly, across organizations because of what we've witnessed over the last few years.
And I think that AI is mimicking so much human stuff. How many times do you say, "Oh, this is an amazing podcast episode"? Oh, it turns out it was robots. You're like, "What? What? Robots? How did this happen?" Right? And it's all of a sudden that authentic leadership is an intensely human leadership, the part that's still reserved for us. And it's about deep connection. It's about empathy. It's about emotional connection. It's not about the content of what I say. It's about the authenticity, my intention, my servant leadership type approach built into that authenticity. It's so necessary in an increasingly mechanized and digitized work experience. And this is why I hold HR leaders in such high regard, because you have studied people and human nature. And to me, this is why HR is the future, because the future is intensely people oriented for all the reasons that you're suggesting with this evolving workplace. New generations coming in, the post-pandemic worker, this backlash against digitization and trying to rehumanize our workplaces. How in the world are you going to do that with HR? The answer is you're not.
Yeah. Ugh. I'm getting excited. We got to move on, but I'm getting so excited because I feel like we're gonna have such good tips for people who are here. Like, I want to dive into the self-awareness piece. Like, I put it in the title because I feel like, I mean, I've met a lot of leaders that lack self-awareness. Just they're in a room and I'm like, what are you doing? So why do you think self-awareness is often overlooked when developing leadership skills?
Yeah, I think when we think about leadership, we think about the results. We think about putting up numbers. We think about achieving goals, checking boxes, conquering new markets, whatever it might be. Very rarely do we celebrate leaders for their self-awareness. We're like, yeah, the reason we promoted, Charlie is because Charlie is one of the most self-aware people I know. You never hear that, and Charlie grew sales. Charlie did this. We don't celebrate that the same way. At the same time, I think self-awareness from the training that we have, the conditioning we have, it feels a little touchy-feely, a little squishy, hard to quantify and measure. So I think that kind of does it a disservice, though. And unfortunately, for many leaders, they don't really recognize the importance of developing self-awareness almost until it's too late. When there's a career limiting issue, they got passed over for promotion, they lose a top performer, whatever it might be. These are the types of situations that say, yeah, you know what? Self-awareness is something I could have used, before this happened. So I think we need to do more to not overlook it the way that we have before, but to
Yeah.
recognize that it's a key to unlocking, performance.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat that I want to address right now because I think it's like so timely. How do we as HR professionals work with or for leaders who don't care about being self-aware?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that when you start looking at the results, when you look at down engagement scores, you look at the exit interviews, you look at the turnover, you end up having to make that business case for why self-awareness matters. And I think having support from hopefully more senior executives, if you have a middle manager or director, VP, for example, who says self-awareness, we don't need that, we just need to put up the numbers. You really need the support of your senior leadership to also say, like, that's not how we do things around here. That's not how we get our head around here. We have to look at more than that, because ultimately that's not leadership. The future and what we have to understand about leadership is that it really is about two things. It's about the mission and it's about the welfare of those people who are with you pursuing that mission. It is not about you. So I think that at the end, you need some support to help you make that case,
Yeah.
but that's what it takes.
I think for me, what I've seen work really well is, especially with like maybe early leadership, I think this really resonates with them. I always talk to them about how, as leaders, we are under a microscope all day long. Every reaction we have, how we show up in meetings, our employees are looking at us and actually pointing to how we behave so that they better understand how they can behave. And so when I talk about self-awareness with leaders, I'm like, and they tell me, if they tell me it's not important, I'm like, hey, do you want your employees to show up and scream at each other, miss deadlines, I don't know, misbehave, be rude to one another? Well, no. Okay, then why would you behave like that? And I think like
Yeah.
that piece of like really trying to approach it from like, think about the impact that you have as a leader. Because I think when you frame it like that, a lot of people are like a little less defensive. And you tell them like, hey, you want your team to be this like really amazing thing. Think about the impact of your like your abilities and how you show up. That's what's really going to drive their behaviors as well.
Yeah, I think there's a situation where someone may not be aware, but they haven't known it's important. So you always want to start with that door open invitation to increase self-awareness. But in the case you have somebody who's digging in their heels and they're causing problems and their lack of self-awareness is an issue, we saw in the earlier chat that we have busy, overworked executives. And when you have a remedial case like that, sometimes you need those kind of buzzwords and those catchphrases to get through. And I say, you can either choose self-awareness or self-sabotage. Pick one. Like, which is it going to be? Because that's exactly what happens at the end of the day. And no leader wants to self-sabotage, but when you frame it like that and you say there are only two options, right? Then I think you're more likely to at least get their attention, and from there you can start to have the conversation.
I'm going to think about that for the rest of the day. You can either be self-aware, or you can self-sabotage. And I'm probably going to make content about it because I really love that. That's like so true. Like
One.
a lot of
One.
people think about it that way. Yeah.
That's true.
Okay. Our next question, and I love a good in your opinion. In your opinion, can somebody lead authentically without being fully self-aware?
Yeah, in my opinion, absolutely not. I just don't think it's possible to have authenticity without awareness, because how would you know what energy to bring to the leadership moment and to the conversation, to the relationship? So I think that self-awareness is the very first step. And I think the second is around intentionality, right? So how do I set the intention for what I'm trying to accomplish in this leadership moment? I think a lot of times what we don't recognize is that leaders have a range of options they can choose from in terms of their interaction, because you can't make anyone do anything. You can only create an environment, and then you can control your own behavior in that moment. So I think without awareness, none of that goes well. You can't read properly, you can't choose properly, you can't execute properly. So that's why I say fairly emphatically, no, you cannot lead authentically without being self-aware.
Okay, so earlier in the very beginning, you read us that stat that did not include people like you and me, where it was like 10 to 15% of people are actually self-aware. And if we're saying that's a key component to being able to lead authentically, would it be a wild thing to say that most leaders of major corporations or small companies are not actually leading authentically then?
Yes, I would agree 100%. And I don't think it's out of their intention that they want to misinterpret, they want to lead people astray or act inauthentically. But I think authenticity is earned, and it's earned through reflection, it's earned through self-examination, it's earned through collecting feedback. And it doesn't just happen. I think that's the most important point. So if somebody truly wants to lead authentically, they have to commit themselves to doing the hard work of really exploring those not so fun moments when a meeting kind of took a left turn on us, or a decision didn't turn out the right way, or when we do lose a top performer, starting to ask not what's wrong with them, or oh, it was probably a bigger offer or something, but what could I have done differently? You have to go to those places that scare you if you truly want to develop that self-awareness. And the reward for all of that effort and crawling through that broken glass is a more authentic and powerful leadership style.
Yeah. I think we're going to get more into self-awareness, but I had to ask that question because that stat, I mean, it kind of shook me. Like I think I'm very self-aware and there's probably things I'm missing.
Well, and I think it's a term that we bandy about and give too much. I think leadership itself is a loaded term. I talk to so many managers who are like, "Oh, I'm a manager. I'm not a leader." I'm like, "Whoa, time out." Like you can, everybody is a leader, has the opportunity to lead, even individual contributors who just got here, new hires, all the way up to the CEO, president, and board beyond. And I think that having that mentality is important. So how can I show up as an authentic leader? And what does it really mean if we're saying that it takes, if self-awareness is the currency of authentic leadership, how do we earn it?
I'm going to also think about that. Matt, you are like full of like really good one-liners. I aspire to be as good as you.
It comes with age, I think. No, yeah.
I'll get there eventually. Okay. How Okay, so we've touched on this lightly, but I think I want to dig a little deeper. How does authentic leadership actually influence organizational cultures? And I put this caveat in here, especially during times of uncertainty, because candidly, I feel like we've been in uncertain times for like the last 5 years, and we might be
Yeah.
in it for the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think culture is another one of those 10-cent words that we throw about a lot, but don't think about what it actually means. Culture, really, to me, in my own definition, is really all about connection. And ideally, it happens in multiple layers. So it's like connection to the mission, connection to one another, connection to yourself, and understanding that self-awareness. So the reason that authentic leadership is so powerful is that it really strengthens those bonds, those connections. When it comes to, for example, an authentic style of leadership can really help people understand why the work they do every day is supportive of the organization's broader mission. And so the contributions they get to experience and that sense of purpose that's so important now and so often overlooked, unfortunately, all of a sudden becomes in play, and people sit up a little straighter, they go home a little happier. Like all these types of things are the outcropping or the byproduct, if you will, of a more authentic leadership style.
Yeah. It's so interesting because, like, during times of uncertainty, I think sometimes leaders who might not be as mature in their practice default to, well, everything's going to be okay. And I find that so inauthentic. And what got us into a lot of trouble, like when layoffs were really peaking and layoffs are still occurring, is when your leaders are telling you everything will be okay, but then a layoff happens. Like, how would you ever trust that leader again?
Right. And I think it comes from let's give the benefit of the doubt and say it comes from a good place. We don't want people to worry about things they can't control. However, I've seen this with the passing generations, and with each generation, the amount of skepticism goes up because the amount of transparency goes up. And so when millennials entered the workforce, we started to see a lot more skepticism. Gen Z was so adept at it that now, looking at videos, looking at all something, everything that's processed is immediately suspect. And so if what you're saying sounds a little too good to be true, that's not being transparent, right? But instead saying, yeah, you know what, we had to have a layoff, we had to protect sort of the ongoing concern of the firm, and we think that we've done that, but we can't predict the future. How do you balance that out? So you have to choose that authentic path that says, we've made some decisions. They haven't been comfortable for anybody involved, but at the same time, also being honest. I think trusting your people and recognizing that you've hired grown-ups and you should treat them as such is a pretty great place to start.
Yeah. I love that because there's that Spotify ad. I think it might have been an ad or their CPO was like, we want our employees are adults. Like, why we don't need to tell them where to work. We just need them to do their work. And I feel like it's a novel concept on, like, they're adults. They've lived a life. They have a lived experience and a perspective. Like, all of us are getting pretty good at being able to tell the truth versus like the BS. And I think when you're thinking about leading a culture and leading an organization, defaulting to authentic leadership actually does just so much more good in uncertain times than, trying to make everything sound like it's okay and not
Yeah.
trusting your employees for their intelligence of being able to figure out what's going on.
Well, and I think what uncertainty does is it stokes fear. It stokes fear in everybody. I mean, when you talked earlier about the CEOs and others, how would you describe leadership teams? A lot of it's stress, burned out. They're carrying a lot of weight. They understand the responsibility they have to, make payroll, for example. So I think we can't take that lightly. But we have to acknowledge in this context specifically that if that uncertainty is going to stoke fear in people and it can, the culture itself can act as a buffer to that a little bit through that connection. But the opposite of fear isn't courage, it's love. And I think if your employees aren't feeling that sense of authentic connection, genuine care, that sort of human bond, then all of a sudden their fears are only going to increase. And that's what happens when we take a more rationalistic approach. When we talk about numbers and EBITDA and all these things, and people are like, this isn't making me feel warm and fuzzy at all. This is just, who's this for, right? But
Yeah.
instead, pulling people aside, saying, hey, you know what? I know you're probably hurting right now. I know I am. I'm actually going to take the afternoon and kind of get my head together so I can come back on Monday morning with what a much more authentic way of letting people in and treating them again like adults, but also like human beings. Like, is that too much to ask? The work's going to get its due, but I think if we're not human with each other in the process, everything gets harder. And it actually works against what I think that a lot of those leaders are trying to say in the first place when they say everything's going to be okay. Well, that's
Yeah.
just the gut reaction. That doesn't make anybody actually feel better. But instead, throwing your arms around people and saying, like, we're going to get through this. Okay, well, now we're starting to get somewhere, you know?
That feels different. Yeah. And the impact to the culture, like then your employees are more engaged, more productive. Like there's so many beautiful impacts and outcomes to behaving as such. And I've been thinking about this a lot because early in my career, every leader I had, their advice was like, do not be vulnerable, do not show emotion, do not express anything, like show up, be cold. And I had a lot of leaders early in my career that like that is what they were. They would show up to meetings very stern, give their opinion, have no reaction as if they were robots, and then move on. And
Right.
when I became a leader for the first time, I was like, oh my God, I don't think I can do that. Like, I don't think I can be that person the way that they wanted to be that person. And I wonder, like, where did that school of thought even happen? Like,
Yeah.
why was that something that was going on maybe 10, 15 years ago? And now it's so different.
Yeah, it's likely a holdover from something like the Industrial Revolution, where people were basically extensions of machines. And so we tried to treat them, and if we gave them an inch, then they'd take advantage of us and things. But I'll tell you that my very first adult job was in the US Marine Corps. And so going through military service, you'd be shocked at how much they focus on some of the esprit de corps and getting to know people, you know, your Marines as people and understanding how to get the human part right, even though these are some of the finest warriors in the world. But the reality is that there's something that we go through together, and that's equally as much a part of it. So I think that unfortunately, sometimes the business leaders and the business press only picks up on the mechanistic side of it. Don't show emotion. It's all rational. It's a numbers game, blah, blah, blah. That's not how real leaders act. And that's not how real leaders get results. And in an increasingly human driven workforce, in the future, when all the other technical bits have eventually become commoditized for the most part, we all have access to the same natural resources, operating capabilities, AI platforms. It's the human bit that's going to set us apart. So we need to make sure that our human leadership styles are what carries the day.
Yeah, and I saw this in real time, honestly, with our CEO at Work Week. We had a company retreat last June, and he was very transparent about the hardship we had faced the previous year and what that meant for the business and the impact it had on him personally and what our leadership team was going through behind closed doors that nobody knew about. And watching the reactions in the room as our employees like really started to see who he was as a person. I don't say this lightly, like now I feel like they're even more devoted to him and our company because they saw how hard it was for him in the previous year and how much he cared about all of them in the room. And I think like that was a beautiful leadership moment that I don't even think he intended for it to be, but he was like, I need them all to understand like what we just went through to like get to this point as a company, as an early stage startup during one of the hardest times to raise money. And it was like really inspirational to me personally. And I was like, wow, like authentic leadership really brings this like very different energy to your organization and the
Yeah.
outcomes like tenfold. It's just, I feel like a lot of people are just scared to be authentic. And
It's a
that's,
huge leap of faith because you don't know what's going to happen. You can't know what's going to happen. But I think when you are vulnerable like that, you're honest like that, then the people who are going to be committed to you, to the organization moving forward, you're going to reach them in a way that strengthens that bond that we talked about. And when you emerge on the other side and now you're back to growth and you're having success again, then they're that much more likely to stay, even when market forces changes, because you realize that we've been through something together. We're here to see the mission through, whatever it might be. So I feel like that's the part that is worth taking that leap of faith and just whatever bubbles up, being authentic means being okay, just putting it out there and saying, we hurt trust when we took this action. We understand that it's going to take time to rebuild that. We understand that too, but we're in this together. Okay.
yeah, it had such an impact, honestly. And like the people, I'm sure there were people in the room who thought it was cringe. I'm sure there are people in the room who were like, I don't believe this. But then, I mean, I don't think they work their organization anymore, candidly. And I think the people that really saw like what we went through and really felt like we were a team going through it together decided they wanted to stay. And I feel like that's really special. And that's like not quantifiable either. Like there's no measurement for you to be like, yes, your authentic leadership produced a 10x amount. Like I think a lot of times leaders are looking for that quantitative data of like what they did had an impact. And I think the thing about authentic leadership is you just have to believe, hopefully, the actions I am taking are actually going to improve all these other things that maybe aren't measurable, the intangibles of our workplace.
Yeah, and I think that skepticism that you get back sometimes after having gone through something like that is a form of self-protection. People are saying, like, I'm afraid for my, am I going to be next? Right. And understanding and looking at them with empathy, but understanding that, we need to get past this because that energy that you're putting into skepticism and fear and worry is energy that's not going into actually helping us all, get through this and get to the other side. So what can I do to help you and get that assurance and feel that connection? And if they just can't get there, then they're going to move on, like you said.
Yeah.
But for those, I think just being understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, this next question, I mean, I have to ask this one because I think like some people intend to show up authentically and are like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna be it. But what are some early warning signs that a leader has just like absolutely drifted away from authenticity?
I think surprises is a big one. When you come out of a meeting, you're like, "Oh my gosh, she really blew up in that meeting. What happened?" Well, you happened. Hey, you
Yeah.
you made that happen, right? So I think the surprise is when you didn't get the result you expected. That's definitely a big one. Another one that's a little bit more verifiable, tangible, is when we have low morale, low engagement scores, when we have poor performance issues. We have to understand that the definition of performance really has changed since the Industrial Revolution, even if we don't always act like it. And if people don't feel that trust, if they don't feel they're getting authenticity from you, then it's going to affect their performance. Another one though is career stagnation. When you realize that you're up for promotion or you're trying to get a clear beat on that next level. Let's say you're a director, you want to be a VP someday, and you're having an honest conversation with your manager, senior manager, and they're saying, just not ready. We don't have a timetable for you right now. Like rather than saying, oh, they're holding me back, it's like, well, wait a second, what am I doing? Right. So I think those are all some different examples. The last one I'd share is that same level of burnout and stress that we saw in the chat to start the conversation today. That is an example of a lack of authenticity. Because the reality is, when we carry all of that negative energy, it's because we've not made peace with who we are
Yeah.
and the environment in which we're operating. Because it's one thing to go through challenges, but when you truly have an authentic leadership style and you truly have self awareness and self acceptance, you've made peace with the fact that you can't control the outcome. All you can do is control how you show up as a leader, how you draw people closer to you, how you help them set themselves up for success in a way that's aligned with the organization's mission. When you're carrying burnout and stress, that means that you're putting a lot of energy into something that's blocking all of that great flow. So to me, that's another sign that if you're going home and you're like, I'm exhausted, well, where did all that energy go? Because you clearly weren't just allowing it to flow through you a little bit, right?
Yeah. I think one of the big ones, yes to all of that, but one of the big ones for me that I observed in my career was when the leader started talking in buzzwords or like around things and never giving context. And I like that to me, I was just like, what is going on here? Like, can you just shoot me straight? Like, I'm such a direct person that I'm like, shoot me straight. Like, what are you actually saying? Because if I lead conversation and I don't have clarity, and like, let's say, like, historically, I've gotten that clarity, and all of a sudden, this leader is not telling me things, holding out to the last minute to give me details, like, not telling me why they're asking for things, my alarm bells are going off right away.
Yeah, it's only bad things can come from that, and your mind fills in gaps. So the question
Well,
is, do they not know? Because that's scary. Do they not want to tell me? That's scary, right?
yeah.
That whatever it is, it can't be
Yeah.
good, right? Otherwise, there's been a change in their demeanor. What's behind the change? We start to invent things. Where our minds are very creative in that way. And they probably
Totally.
don't even know that we're feeling this way. And if they just have the conversation, they'd be like, "Oh, sorry, I was distracted by this thing going on at home that I wasn't going to tell you about, but now that you mention it, here's what's happening." You're like, "Oh my
Yeah.
gosh," right? Totally different.
I would assume the worst. This next question I'm excited to get to. Like, we saw a lot of people are like, we're having really good conversation in the chat, but when we're coaching a leader who is struggling with authenticity, where do you recommend we start?
Yeah, I feel like this is where, as HR professionals, you really have to protect us from ourselves. Because I'm on the business side, right? I've never been in HR, I'll never be in HR, but I am a tremendous HR champion in the sense that we need HR more than ever. And I think in some cases that means calling us on our BS and holding up that mirror. So in this case, the very first thing that I want to see happen when coaching a leader is setting the expectation. A lack of self-awareness is career limiting. A lack of self-awareness is not what we're all about here, right? Let's just be clear and establish, make sure that we have their attention. But after that, how do we set the frame for the conversation to unfold a little bit more naturally? When we can set the space for there to be confidentiality, a place to explore. We don't have to have all the answers. This is going to take time. Like all these types of things really sets the sort of environment for us to create the space and create the time to be able to do some exploration, but also set the intention. Why? What is it about self-awareness that's tied to that leader's why? What do they want? Do they want to have influence? Do they want to make sure that their function or division is seen as exemplary by others, other peers, and not be ashamed by whatever that answer is? It was, I want to make a ton of money. Okay, that's fine. Like, let's talk about that. I want to be promoted within the next 6 to 12 months. Okay, let's talk about that, and then connect that self-awareness journey to whatever it is that they see as that broader why. But then just be prepared to provide them tons of support and scaffolding along the way. It's just not something that really comes naturally to a lot of leaders. This whole self-examination, self-exploration, we don't teach them in business school. We don't celebrate it in our culture generally. If anything, we make it actually harder by pretending it's not necessary, when in fact it's deeply necessary. So again, this is where our people professionals can really show up and do that hero's work of helping managers develop that authenticity.
Yeah. In environments where I have felt like I can't be in environments where I feel like I could not be authentic are most environments where I felt unsafe. And so if I were coaching a leader who's really struggling with this, I would kind of go in and just try to understand, like, do they feel like they belong? Do they feel like they're connected to our culture? Do they feel safe to actually show up as themselves? And I think it's just a really scary time, honestly, in our country where people don't feel safe in the world. And then they're showing up at work and they're also thinking, can I even be authentic here?
Yeah. And that's one of the things where it's a range, right? So it's, I didn't know I needed to be, or I didn't realize that I wasn't, all the way to I'm resisting it because I'm afraid. Like there's an entire range. We just need to figure out start with where you are, meet them where they are, and kind of move forward from there. But don't be surprised if they say, you know what, I'm ready to start this journey. What happens now? How do I do it?
Yeah.
Because they don't know. There's no playbook to run necessarily, right?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I had to sneeze in the middle of that.
You're allergic to this, I get it.
No, I'm not allergic to this gut. I want to get to two more questions and then we will get to live questions, I promise. And the chat is really going off too. I have to talk about this. We've talked about leadership, how to support leaders. We talked about HR's role, a little bit of this, but what are some of our blind spots as HR when it comes to self-awareness?
I think one of them is underappreciating your superpowers as HR professionals. Nobody else studies this stuff. Human behavior, human tendencies, sheer humanity. HR has Kleenex in their office for a reason. Like you get the worst of us, period. So I think being able to appreciate the role that you play is really important, but also recognize that the average HR person that I talk to hates selling. They don't like being in that sales role. It feels slimy to them. They feel like they're being overly promotional or skeevy in some way. Got to get over it. The reality is that all of us are selling our positions, our ideas, our good intentions, using our consultative powers, connecting to real business value. These types of things are things that great sales professionals do. And I think that if more of our HR professionals really just made peace with that, I'm sorry, but it's true. We're always selling. We're all in sales at some level. That's huge. And then, leading by example. I think showing us how to be authentic, to lead with confidence, to get the people part right by being people forward in our leadership. Those would be some that really come to mind for me.
I'm laughing because in the chat, people are saying they hate selling. I also had that approach early in my HR career, and we'll talk about my PI behavioral index type, but I love selling my ideas now. I'm like, I'm going to bring you along for this journey. I actually reframed it for myself because I also felt like selling was like a little bit inauthentic. And I instead, like in my mind, I reframe it as like, I'm bringing you on for my journey. I'm like a big book reader. So I'm like, you're on my adventure. I'm going to sell you on my adventure. So I'm like, let me tell you my story, my vision in a really exciting way that's going to get them excited. And it's not sales, but it actually is. Because then they like see my excitement. They buy into it. I mean, like I had to reframe it for myself because I thought selling was icky, honestly.
Super smart. Great example of self-awareness right there.
Oh, thank you. Wow, I feel like I'm in therapy right now, honestly.
We're in
Um,
HR therapy all of a
They're
sudden.
in HR therapy. That's like basically therapy. Well, not tell my therapist that. I have to mention one blind spot when it comes to self-awareness. I think HR people give so much of themselves to organizations. It is really one of the most admirable thing about every single person I meet in HR is they want to give, give, give always. They're compassionate. They're empathetic. They're always giving so much of them. I think where we struggle with self-awareness is like we give so much that we don't give ourselves enough. And then we're stuck in this place where we start to hate an organization because we've done so much and feel like we're getting nothing in return, no love, no respect back. And then we slowly start to disengage, burn out, and want to leave. And I think for me, like my big thing for HR people is just recognizing like you cannot be everything everywhere all at once. Huh, that was a good pun.
Yeah.
You can't. You have to take time for yourself. You have to be able to have the space to think creatively, to context shift in times that you can do that. You shouldn't be running from meeting to always solving problems. And I think like somebody mentioned, let them in the book, let them in the chat. And I think
Mm.
that's helpful for a lot of HR people. Like we can't solve every single problem. We can't give 150% and give nothing to
Yeah.
ourselves. So that's
I
like
think
my
it's so true, so true. And I always say that self-care is never selfish. And I think it's such a leadership activity to prioritize self-care when you need it. And it's just you and me talking, there's nobody else listening. So I'll tell you that I scheduled for myself about 3 weeks from now a transformational energy and sound healing workshop. Right? Because I wanted to restore myself a little bit and I was curious. So, yeah, self-care, never selfish. You got to take care of yourself if you're going to show up as a leader for others.
Absolutely. And now on to my final question. Everyone's been talking about this in the chat, but what tools do you find the most helpful when you're working with leaders and working with organizations where they're trying to develop self-awareness?
Yeah, I love assessments because I think for the amount of time it takes, you can really raise self-awareness in a very quantifiable way. When I'm giving my students at Boston College as an example, I give them one called Values in Action. And learning your values is a very powerful thing to understand what ideals do you want to see in the world? Do you see a world that's like really well organized, one that's is supremely creative, one that's full of adventure? Once you realize what those things are and where they come from deep inside you, you can express them, right? I give several different emotional intelligence batteries as well, and also the predictive index, which really tells us about behavioral preferences. And I know you've had some experience with it. I'm a persuader myself. When I first learned about my tendencies, it just made everything fall into place and made things a lot simpler. And it actually helped me to accept things that I'm just not, and that's very powerful.
I think like my most light bulb moment was when I took the predictive index assessment and then I made my CEO take it. And then we got back the results and I was like reading his results and my results. And I was like, wow, everything makes sense now. Like I had been writing and he'll tell you this, like I had been writing in my reviews, like I wish you like gave me more appreciation. And like in our styles, like he's a maverick, I'm a persuader. And it's literally like he thinks a lot of people are like self-motivating, like his behavioral tendencies, people will self-motivate. So I don't need to motivate them in any way. And my tendency was like, I want to hear that I matter. So like, you need to tell me I matter. And I give him that feedback regularly. Like I'm always teasing him, like, can you just appreciate me today? But I thought the assessment was really interesting for both of us because I think it unlocked a lot of the things that honestly, like I felt like maybe I was the problem. I was like, oh my God, am I
Oh
the
yeah.
problem? Is it
Oh
me?
my gosh. When it's really just human dynamics. So a lot of times we crash into each other like bumper cars. We have competing styles, competing goals. When we get it all in on paper there and we can see it through data, then all of a sudden things start to make a lot more sense, and it takes our relationship to the next level.
And I think like no matter how self-aware you are, with a really good assessment that's like based in science, which this one is, not like Myers-Briggs, which is not based in science, a really good assessment can tell you really important things about yourself that maybe you felt but didn't necessarily know. And now I'm looking at like his style profile and my style profile, and I'm like, now I know where the conflicts are going to be potentially before we're like 6 months out and I'm really mad at him about something. And then I'm like heated and I'm like, why am I so mad about this thing? Now I see where the areas of opportunity are. And I can almost like self-regulate before I even get to that moment, recognizing that like that is his behavioral tendency. That is my behavioral tendency. That's not going to change. But now I can stop getting so upset about certain things and actually coach him better.
Yeah,
Um,
assessments give great value in a quick time frame. One of the other ones, the last thing I'd share on this one is around journaling. Journaling, I have a love-hate relationship with it. Hugely important. Whatever form of self-reflection and making time and space to kind of walk back through your day, your month, really think about how you reacted in different situations, huge. I'm also a big mindfulness guy, so meditation to me is a technology, and I think it's just been tremendously helpful for raising self-awareness.
yeah, I'm crying at somebody in the chat saying they're a journaling hater because, like, same. But also, my notes app on my phone is if I ever got murdered and someone got my phone or something, I need the notes app to self-destruct because that's where I'm like really writing some thoughts down. Like, that's usually
Yeah.
where I go. I'm like in the middle of like a heated moment. I'm like, I'm just going to write this in the notes app. It's in the app, whatever. Some of them I share with my best friends when we're like really angry. We have like a shared note where we just like put our feelings into it and just like let it go. And I
Yeah.
think that has just really changed my life. It's like less traditional journaling and more on the go. Like I had this thought and I need to let it go by putting it in my notes app. And so,
And the AI tools are getting a little bit better too. You can have a conversation privately, at least with the AI, and they'll just prompt thinking. It's not what it's saying; it's what it's generating within you that's really valuable. So I'm excited about the future in that regard.
yeah, sometimes I ask ChatGPT, like, why am I so mad about this thing? And the responses are always funny. Okay, we have 15 minutes left, and I really want to get to live Q&A because I think we have some like really good questions popping in there. So let me take a peek and see what we got going on. If you have not submitted a question, you can like on the more button, it shows you how to do this. Okay, the first question we have, and you can upvote these by the way, you all by clicking the Q&A. Can you tell me about where the line is when authenticity and self-awareness gets into being too self-deprecating and causing people to doubt your capabilities or just show up with low self-esteem? I think this might be the case for me and also something that impacts women more than men. This
Very
is such
nice.
it's okay. You go ahead.
Well, what comes to mind for me is that it's possible to be too comfortable or too much self-disclosure too early in a relationship. Imagine that you're on the first date with somebody, you wouldn't just unload everything about your whole life on them. You kind of ease them into that. I've been married 30 years, like it's a process. But if somebody's in new hire onboarding and you're like, let me tell you about my biggest failure as a leader to date, like it's probably not a little too soon for that. So I think you got to read the room a little bit. But I think where you find yourself holding back, go just an inch beyond that. Can you go just an inch, not a mile, not 10 feet, an inch? Can I go just a little further than I normally be comfortable with? Over time, you'll understand better how to read the situation and where you get the results from sharing something that's vulnerable or sharing something that, could be self-deprecating. I find for myself, for example, I use self-deprecation a lot because otherwise I tend to have some pretty hard edges. And sometimes when you get to be later on in your career, you can be a little bit like not approachable. So I find that it became a tool for me to be able to tell people, no, it's okay. I'm just mad. Like let's hang out, right? And so you kind of will develop a feel for it. But if you feel too much, like if you're making people uncomfortable, yeah, you got to dial that back.
Yeah. I have one thing to add here. I read a study once years ago. I cannot actually tell you where I read it. I might have read it in Cosmo magazine for all I know. But I was really a self-deprecating humor type kind of person, like making fun of my abilities, like just, trying to be like more relatable. And I read this study that people actually perceive people with self-deprecating humor as also being less confident. And I thought that was really interesting. In my head, it really unlocked something because I was like, less confident. I'm so confident. Like, I have delulued myself to a level of I'm like, I'm going to be delusional about the life I want, the people I want in it, my abilities, my capabilities. I'm going to have no one tell me no. And it really changed how I show up as a leader and the impact it had on my own self-esteem. Who you have to ask yourself when you have those moments where you start to doubt yourself, ask yourself this question: who is telling me this? And if the answer is you, I still do it. I look in the mirror and I'm like, who's telling me that I'm not great? Oh, it's me? No, I'm great. And you can just build yourself up because nobody is telling you those things. And I
Yeah.
really unlocked a different level of my life and happiness by just believing that like I can do anything I want to do. Maybe I could do brain surgery. I don't know. That's like a joke I make often because I've watched enough Grey's Anatomy where I could do a craniotomy. It's a joke I'm making. No, no, no dissing to the medical community that literally goes through decades of learning to do that. But I just think there's something like fun and beautiful about being able to believe in yourself and having no one tell you no.
Well, I love that. And I also think it's about balance, right? So if you portray confidence and then you add some self-deprecation where it's warranted, it balances it. If you don't display the confidence and you only lead with the self-deprecation, then people are like, oh, this person lacks confidence.
Yeah.
On the point about we live in an outdated gendered workplace. And so, unfortunately, for women, that means that when you do bring balance, it's seen as out of balance. And
Mm.
that's not right. It's not fair. It has to change, in my opinion. But ultimately, I think that's something that we have to recognize and, and continue to chip away at. So, yeah, self-deprecation and those types of things can be overdone. Vulnerability can be overdone. Let's just keep it all in balance. Water finds its level. We can too.
Yeah, I love that. So I still make fun of myself. I call myself a dork all the time for reading Harry Potter fan fiction. Um, a lot of people are putting good comments in here. Thanks for the conversation. I aim to be an authentic and empathetic leader always. When having to work through and deal with layoffs, this creates tremendous stress and inner turmoil for me. Weeks of making choices about people's livelihoods, strategic secrets, and all that's connected there leave me feeling demotivated, anxious, and inauthentic, and more. How do people manage these tensions?
Yeah, it shows up on the business side too. We found that millennials and Gen Z, for example, that really have a very strong social drive, meaning like societal and the welfare of people, really had a hard time. We said we need to have layoffs. Which of your people are going to go? And they're like, oh my gosh, this goes against my ideals and my values, right? So it happens across the board for sure. I think that the reality is that the business world is a mechanistic world in a sense, right? We have to run profitable businesses or we'll be out of business and then we can't help anybody. But I think that it's possible to deliver tough news without losing our humanity. And it's an art form. And it's a way of saying, how can I reconcile sort of the decisions, the fact that there are these consequences in the world and in the world of work as well, but to still treat people with compassion and empathy and also not take it home with us. We still have to show up as leaders in our communities and our families. And if we're not able to leave work at work, and I don't mean compartmentalize, but I mean truly make peace with sort of the reality of the world as it is, then then we probably still have some work to do for ourselves as well.
Yeah, I think this question is, I will tell you, like we had to navigate a layoff, I think 2023, and the feedback my CEO gave me was, I don't think I've ever seen you so cold. He's like, you're usually such a warm person, but when we had to approach this scenario, you were very clinical about it. And I told him, like, I was like, candidly, if I allowed myself to feel too much, I probably would have broke it down. And like every night I left and closed my computer and like really sat with those emotions for a long time. And it was really hard. Like transparently, I still think it's one of the hardest things I've had to do in my career to date and still feel so much empathy for those people that we had to say goodbye to. It was just tough for me personally. And I mean, that's also really tough for them as they were losing their livelihood. And I think like when you are authentic, you do tend to feel those emotions and you have to keep space for those. And so like every night I would spend like 5 minutes just like meditating after it to like calm
Mm.
myself down, just to like be prepared to approach the next day. And I think when it comes to being authentic, like after that process concluded, we were very transparent with the organization on like why we made these decisions. What does that mean for us in the future? And I think that really helped me as well in knowing that the end game was that we were always going to be transparent about it and that we were going to do things to better set ourselves up in the future for success. And so I think
Sure.
like that was big for me. And it is really hard in the moment for everyone to see you smiling and like, and you're in your mind thinking, I'm planning this layoff. Like, but you have to remember too, it's really hard because like we sit at the intersection of interest of the people and interest of the business. And that means sometimes we have to make really hard decisions for the business, but that decision will also be in the best interest of everyone else who remains. So
Right.
just a thought. Okay. How do you go about teaching self-awareness to executives who don't see HR as a strategic partner?
I think it comes back to that business case. I think the reality is that these outdated approaches we've taken,
Mm.
just they're not working anymore. When you look at your CFO as an example, they invest in payroll, but all that energy that's represented by that investment of capital gets dissipated by disengagement, by a lack of wellness, by absenteeism, presenteeism, resenteeism, all these things. And so I think that the business sort of understands that there's a relationship between how people feel at work and productivity, but I don't think that we don't teach that kind of math in our business schools. So I think that as an HR professional, being able to make those connections between the human element and the things that the business is taught to care about, the strategic outcomes, the drivers, the metrics, these things to really make that strong business case, I think is a great place to start.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. Like, I think there are a lot of executives out there who don't view HR as a strategic partner, and candidly, it's their loss. Like, they should know
100%, yeah.
after your IP, after your intellectual property, the next most important asset is your people. And the person who is directly doing work that impacts those people is your HR leader. And so I do think like tying every piece of work you're doing, aligning it with the business goal and an outcome, then slowly will show them you are that strategic partner. And also, I think we just have to acknowledge sometimes people will never believe that you're the strategic partner. There are venture capitalists out there, CEOs out there that don't believe in HR, and that's fine. And you should spot them a mile away and stay away from them.
Yeah, but their competition does. Their competition, who will be ahead, will rehumanize workplaces, will look to HR as a strategic partner, right? And ultimately, even when you talk about intellectual property as capital, it's still created by human capital. And IP has a shelf life. So the reality is that any competitive position you want to have in the future is going to come through your people. And if your competition is going to deploy their people better in a more human way, a more relational way, in a more authentic way than you are, then any advantage you may have today, it's going to disappear faster than ever, in my opinion.
Yeah. One last question, and then I think we'll have to wrap, which I'm so sad because, Matt, I feel like you and I should have like 5 more sessions about this. Someone said, thanks so much for this conversation. I love that. If you're a new leader, how would you source feedback? Often that everything will be okay or uncertain times attitude has led to my supervisor just being like, you're doing amazing. How can I ask for and actually get authentic feedback from them or even peers?
Yeah, I think feedback is best considered a conversation. So it's not you just hear the one thing and that's the end of it. We're not going to talk about it anymore. So you can ask questions and demonstrate some curiosity, get them talking, come off the floor, go to lunch, whatever you can do to try to have that conversation, and just explain again why it's important to you to get it. And I think that it's a great way to approach that for sure.
Yeah, I think potentially asking about specific work you're doing too might elicit better feedback. So after every project, I like to be like, let's do a project retro. What went well? What are areas of improvement? I think if you can give them those questions ahead of time too, you might be able to actually get even better feedback.
Yeah, historically, there's 2 problems we have with feedback. We don't teach people how to give it or how to
Mhm.
get it. That's the issue. So I think raising education generally about feedback or asking them what's the most impactful feedback you've received over the course of your career. When they tell you, it's going to be something specific. It won't just be platitudes. And you'll be like, see that's what I'm looking for. That you can kind of use that as a jumping off point.
I love that. Okay, we're in our final time together of HR therapy. We still have so many questions we didn't get to. I'm going to think about how to answer those. Thank you so much, everyone, for spending time with us. Like a quick what's next. We always like to send out an after event survey to hear how you felt about this.
Mhm.
The next episode of HR Therapy will be later in May, and it's all about the state of compensation, which is very interesting time to be doing this. And I want to give some final takeaways. Matt, like, thank you so much for being here. Like, I can't say this enough. One, you're just such a force in this area. You have wealth of knowledge. I feel like I learn something new from you every time I talk to you. And I'm just so grateful that you wanted to spend an hour with me chit-chatting about authentic
Mhm.
leadership. For those who are just getting to know you now, like, what's the best way they can reach you?
LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. So I'm easy to find on there. I got the funny name, and that's definitely a great place. And if you're interested in the predictive index, I'm highly active over there and would love to decipher your results and give you the same kind of treatment that you got with your CEO as well.
I got the best treatment. I
It
swear.
helps.
That unlocked a lot for me. I was like, it's not me. I'm not the problem, actually. So here we are. And a big, huge thanks to the Predictive Index. 1, for teaching me so much about myself. 2, for being brilliant partners with me and really trying to elevate the conversation we're having around leadership, self-awareness, and understanding yourself and your team is actually the key to building better cultures. And so I'm so grateful that I get to work with them. So big thanks to them. And thank you to all of you who joined us today, participated in the chat, asked us questions, shared your knowledge. Without you, none of this would be possible. So I'm just so grateful for everyone. Thank you so much. Oh, also, you can take the assessment too if you want to, with that link that is in there. I learned a lot. Okay. I can't wait. Well, thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye, Matt.